What we're going to do is walk through our multi-pronged approach to gun violence. There's going to be numerous speakers from their relevant area of expertise at APD and also at the city. And then we're going to offer the opportunity for folks to see some of these firearms get fired actually in our range over there. So we'll take some Q&A after this, and then we will allow anyone who's interested to go sort of watch those demonstrations. Now, let me begin with by stating that, of course, unfortunately for nearly a decade, gun violence has become even more and more pervasive in our city and is often, of course, connected to other crimes. We've heard concerns from our communities and about this really since I took office. And so today we're announcing a multi-pronged approach to tackle gun violence and deal with gun violence in our community. This includes a mix of reactive and proactive approaches. It includes some more traditional approaches that have been proven in the past. It also includes some innovative approaches that we are at the cutting edge at with respect to national combating of gun violence. Now, I believe we need to treat gun violence with a sense of urgency. For me, this is also a public health issue. When you think of what is literally filling up our emergency rooms, it is the results of gun violence. When you think of that intersection between challenges that we have in our community that we're well aware of, whether it's drug abuse, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's child abuse, when you mix a gun into any one of those equations, that is when you get fatalities. That is when you get what ends up in the emergency room. It's this connection, this formula, that is eroding our city and that is driving violent crime in our community. Now, we know that laws are being changed in Santa Fe, and there's national debate. There's all sorts of issues around guns in general. I want to emphasize that today is not necessarily about that. It's connected to that. But today is not about partisan politics or any of those policies. This is about what our city, the city of Albuquerque, is doing right now to deal with gun violence. And we're here to talk about this approach, which fundamentally, hopefully, will provide more tools to keep our community safe. Now, like most things our city is dealing with, the first step is really to admit that we have a challenge, to admit that we have a problem. And for too long, I think we've fallen into a trap where we've said that somehow gun violence is ancillary to a lot of the other crimes that are happening, when in effect it's again part of that formula. It's difficult to talk about crimes associated with addiction, crimes associated with domestic violence, without also talking about the guns that are used in those crimes. A good example of that is this table of firearms right here. This represents roughly 30 firearms. This is the amount that we collect in a week from different crime scenes. Also an example, the pictures behind me, which our deputy chiefs are going to be going over, these are examples of actual weapons that have been used in the Benny Keith shooting. Also when one of our SUVs was shot at, I believe, 28 plus times by that firearm right there. We're going to walk through some of those, but these are examples of things that are happening in our department and in our city each and every week. So this plan is going to include every corner of APD, and it's also going to include a lot of departments at the city. It includes data-driven, problem-oriented policing, but it includes much more. It includes the Gun Intelligence Center and the technology that's going to inform how we actually deal with these weapons and track them to the people who use them. It includes implementing a shooting response protocol in every incidence of gun violence. It also includes sending out problem response teams that include members of our Family and Community Services Department to do outreach to areas that have been shaken by violence in their community. It also includes acknowledging that this issue is related to public health, and it means engaging research and problem solving through that lens as well. It also means sharing information across law enforcement agencies, not just here in Albuquerque, but throughout our state and even federally through our national databases. It includes smart enforcement of gun laws designed to keep guns out of the hands of violent offenders and felons. It means combining these approaches with a community-oriented policing approach to try and keep our neighborhoods safe. It also means working with our communities to try and problem solve with them together. And that's the connection to the broader community policing efforts that we're going to be talking about for the next year, over the course of the next year. So to go into some of the details on this, I'm going to introduce our Chief of Police, Mike Geier. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm going to give an overview of our new gun violence initiative that we're implementing. I'll introduce, after I speak, the different speakers and where they're from, and give you an overview of what their topics will be today. So we're taking a proactive and reactive approach in our plan to address gun violence in Albuquerque. Last year, 69% of the homicides involved firearms. This year so far, 10 homicides have involved firearms. This year, as the mayor mentioned, we're averaging 27, 30 guns a week recovered. All these guns come here to the crime lab to be processed as evidence. Overall, so far since January 1st, 286 firearms have been stolen this year. The Special Investigations Division, and you'll hear from their commander a little later, recovered 59 of these guns in just 3 months. Of those, 12 were known to be stolen. The problem isn't just homicides. This year, or so far, we have 49 shootings with injuries, 70 shootings without injuries this year again, and 105 shootings with property damage. Data is clearly showing where we need to focus our resources. So to start it off, our first speaker is going to talk about data-driven, problem-oriented policing projects. It'll be Deputy Chief J.J. Griego, new Deputy Chief, but he's formerly from the Southeast Area Command. He's going to talk a little bit about how the RTCCs identify problem areas and hotspots, develop their problem-oriented policing projects to address these, and then the assessments that follow. So, Deputy Chief Griego.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chief. In the Southeast Area Command, we worked with the RTCC to look at, identify essentially empirical data to know where we needed to focus our efforts on. In developing that data, we not only looked at where the shootings occurred, but we also looked at offender information and we looked at victim information to determine if there were any patterns or correlations there as well. So what we did is we developed a problem-oriented policing plan to reduce gun violence. Using the 3 pillars of community-oriented policing, we focused on proactive and post-event response. Community engagement, we worked with our Coast Unit, crime prevention, education, Coffee with a Cop and community events, the Trumbull and La Mesa Neighborhood Association, Mesa Verde Community Center, and post-incident outreach, which somebody will go into a little bit more in detail after I speak. Essentially what that was we wanted to go out after the event within 72 hours and just kind of make contact with the neighbors and community, both to identify any witnesses that we may have not caught the first time we were there, but also to offer outreach as well. Problem solving, this plan was developed based on a problem solving model called the SARA model. It included a warrant roundup, auto theft TAC plans, gang unit investigations, motors with a data-driven approach to crime and traffic safety, bike patrols, narcotics, and NIBIN, which you'll also hear about in a little bit. So then we had to look at department transformation, and that's the 3rd pillar. So what we have to do there is change the aspects of how we do business in congruence with community needs. The problem response teams were able to, they have to have the ability to go out and identify problems and address them from the ground level. Traditionally, the way things work in a police department is an officer may realize a problem, he's got to go to his sergeant, lieutenant, and it has to go up the chain of command to the commander, who then gives approval. But with the PRT teams, we're kind of letting them address issues, again, on the ground level. We're leveraging our interagency collaborations with the state police, FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office, and probation and parole. Now, once we get all the data from this operation, we're going to look at it and determine, do we need to change anything? We're going to look at it and see what's working well and what isn't working well, and that we can adjust the plan accordingly. And again, this all ties into community policing. It also ties into the One Albuquerque philosophy, and we hope that it will provide good results.
Thank you. The next speaker is going to be from the Gun Intelligence Center. The Crime Lab Commander, Chris George, will speak to a number of issues, or a number of programs that we're going to be doing. One of them is splitting our human identification unit. This is our DNA and fingerprint, latent fingerprint processing. We want to reduce the backlog that's back there and increase the turnover time of identifying offenders from this evidence. He'll be talking about the latest forensic technology and our gunshot detection technology. Commander George.
Thank you, Chief. So good afternoon. Thank you for coming out today. So SED is contributing to the initiative in a variety of ways, the highlights being increase in personnel, change in stagnant procedures at the lab, and a heavy reliance on technology. Some of the technology that will be in place in the near future is an automation of the entire DNA unit. With automation, it will let the scientists focus more on the results and interpretation of results. Currently, each case is cut, extracted, quantified, amplified, and a profile is generated. All this is currently done by hand, a single case at a time. With robotics, this process will be automated with the exception of the DNA cut. Up to 80 samples can be tested at a time with zero cross-contamination issues. All guns that are currently coming into the lab are swabbed for DNA. With the amount of guns that the mayor and the chief discussed, this will expedite processing times dramatically. Automation will increase efficiencies, resulting in additional investigative leads, charges, and subsequent prosecution. In the very near future, we'll be the only lab in the state with rapid DNA technology. This capability will allow identification of a known standard within 90 minutes of a swab. Other technologies that we will be implementing in the near future include a gunshot detection system and expanded NIBIN capabilities, thanks to our legislative and our state, both in state and federal partners. National data shows that 80% of gunshot incidents are never reported to police, which results in victims not getting the medical attention they need and vital evidence not being collected. Over 100 cities are currently utilizing gunshot detection technology, including South Bend, Indiana, Fresno, California, Colorado Springs, Colorado, Miami, Florida, and Cincinnati, Ohio. All are showing measurable successes with their programs. The non-technical aspects of the system include the technology detects, locates, alerts within a minute of a shot being fired. False positives are immediately eliminated, and tactical intelligence is provided to dispatch and officers in the field. This improves opportunities to catch shooters on the scene and collect vital evidence, which is then entered into NIBIN. Along with the NIBIN system that we currently have in place, we're dedicating a T1 line, which will improve the NIBIN response rates. Currently, it takes 15 minutes per NIBIN shell casing to be run. Once this T1 line is in place, they'll reduce that time to a minute. Also on the gunshot detection system, this data that is collected is considered forensic evidence. It is admissible into a court and for prosecution. As the chief spoke, we are improving processes here at the lab. We are bifurcating the DNA unit and the latent fingerprint unit. In the past, that unit was run by one supervisor. We have an additional supervisor to run both units at the same time who are trained experts in their field. Once this is in place, we should be able to reduce the backlog that we currently have and, like I said, increase identifications for our detectives, which leads to subsequent prosecutions. If there are any questions revolving any technology that I've mentioned, I'll be available afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Commander George. Our next speaker will be talking about our shooting response protocols. Deputy Chief Medina will explain the 72-hour response that's been mentioned to a shooting, murder, or other incident or shooting with injury, as well as the canvas that we'll be doing, a community-based canvas within the area to identify possible witnesses or gather any evidence, video evidence, whatever may be valuable to our case investigation. So, Deputy Chief Medina.
Thank you, Chief. We're going to be talking about some recent incidents that have affected the city of Albuquerque and the community in the recent past in terms of shooting. And we're going to be talking about a new concept that we've developed with the Albuquerque Police Department, and it's a shooting response protocol. I think that many times we have done a good job in working with victims of violent crime, but in a way the community surrounding these incidents is sometimes forgotten. So what we want to do is we want to work with these communities that surround these shooting incidents. We want to make sure that we get the community back on track and we make sure that we reduce some of their fears. So after every single homicide and as we progress forward, after every shooting that involves injuries, we're going to be having a team that responds out to the community. The team is not just police officers, because the goal is looking at this as a public health issue and making sure that we get resources to the community that surrounds these shootings that may be appropriate, such as working with Family and Community Services, working with Albuquerque Fire Rescue, and going out and talking to the community and getting them to heal from the process of what has occurred. In one circumstance last week, after a recent homicide in the southeast of a young child, our resources were out making contact with the community, and this past weekend they had 58 individuals who attended one of these gatherings and working with us to get them resources. So what we'd want to accomplish is making sure that not only are we there at the time of the incident, but that we provide some aftercare and help reduce the fears that occurred during these shootings and get information on the actual incident, because a lot of time this lack of information leads to uncertainties and unknowns, which increases their fears, but also at the same time see if we could develop more leads in the investigation. As evident after our first outreach, we were able to go out, we were able to identify additional witnesses to a homicide and turn that information over to the investigative bureau so they could look into. Some of the incidents that we've dealt with this past year as a agency has been road rage incidents. For example, 2 high-profile road rage incidents last month resulted in dangerous shootings that occurred, injuring 2 drivers. Detectives worked hard to quickly solve these cases and arrest 4 people. The guns used in both incidents were also recovered. A Nibin hit on the casing from one of the guns tied the offender to another shooting with injuries at an apartment complex on February 9th. Police work and technology allowed detectives to make an arrest of the offender who admitted to the previous shooting. Gang shootings. 4 subjects, including a juvenile, were arrested after firing multiple rounds out of a vehicle, nearly hitting 2 police officers. Officers were dispatched to 1016 Madera Street Southeast. They heard 8 to 10 rapid gunshots. Both officers heard the rounds flying by their head. They identified the sedan, which was firing the rounds out of the car. Police discovered 3 firearms, including a semi-automatic assault rifle in the car, along with numerous magazines and casings. They also discovered 1 pound of marijuana, ½ ounce of heroin, and a digital scale. Guns and drugs have plagued the community during these recent past. Detectives arrested a subject for an outstanding felony warrant. The subject admitted to being in possession of selling marijuana in the Albuquerque area. Detectives searched his vehicle and located $15,000 in cash, large quantities of marijuana, digital scales, narcotics ledgers. Detectives served a second search warrant and discovered 3 more additional firearms, several magazines and ammunition, and a large quantity of marijuana. Felon in possession of firearm cases in the recent past. Officers were called to 2 different homes where Santiago Garcia, a wanted felon, had an arsenal of weapons and bomb-making material. With the assistance of the bomb squad, police recovered 2 guns, 2 pipe bombs, gunpowder, marijuana, and scales at a home across the street from the Duranes Community Center. The following week, Garcia was apprehended at another home in the Northeast Heights where 3 more additional guns, ammunition, and meth were discovered. The final incident is domestic violence shooting at police. In 2 incidents last year, domestic violence incidents escalated into extreme violence. In one case, the offender murdered the ex-husband of his girlfriend and eventually had a shootout with police. He pre-positioned weapons and ammunition throughout the house and wore a gas mask in anticipation of the shootout with SWAT. Officers killed the offender and after he shot at them. In the second incident, a man was drinking heavily and threatened his wife. Shortly after officers arrived, he pointed his assault rifle at officers. One officer fired a round at the offender, who then fired several dozen rapid-fire rounds from his assault-style weapon. Some of those weapons and those incidents are depicted behind us in the pictures. This first rifle up on the top, the black rifle, was the rifle that was used to fire the rounds at the officers in the domestic violence incident. As you look at the shotgun in the corner here, the rifle here in this opposite corner, and the shell casings at the bottom, this was related to the incident where the individual put firearms throughout the house pre-staged in anticipation for a gun battle with officers, along with the gas mask. The Tahoe at the top here with the several shell casings, and you can see all the yellow markings. Those were the incidents where the individual involved in a domestic dispute with his wife fired several shots at officers. And the 2 bottom photos in the middle are photos related to the Benny Keith shooting in the southeast part of Albuquerque, where officers responded to an active shooter. Thank you for your time and consideration in this matter.
And I just want to expand a little bit before we introduce the next speaker. Part of our crime scene response to a shooting incident is to have a major crime scene from the crime lab. Evidence teams come out, as well as criminal investigators. Often, as you can see from some of these pictures, these crimes happen during the night. middle of the night specifically, that we'll be out there all night long. We don't always reach the witnesses, and we don't always be able to do a complete canvass. So we're going to be, within that 72-hour response, we're going to go back and do a canvass, try to identify other witnesses, because typically people don't want to get involved. They don't want to be the person to come out there and confront the police or talk to the police during this investigation. But later on, one-to-one, when we knock on doors, we'll find those witnesses. We'll also do that walkthrough for people that have cameras that may not be readily visible. Some people have Ring cameras, different things that may be of aid to us when we look for evidence. Potential witnesses as well, but also sometimes we don't always have all the facts of the case, and we may get witnesses that talk about where casings could be based on what they heard earlier during that night, and now we're coming forward as we approach them. A lot of times we don't get that reactive response, so we're going to be proactive in that regard. For our next speaker, the Chief Administration Officer of the city, Sarita Nair, will speak. She's going to talk about community outreach and our problem response teams. One of the things, the mayor's big initiative is One Albuquerque. And so a lot of what we're going to do is work with other, not only internal governmental agencies within the city, but with some other groups in the city as well. The police are just one aspect of this crime initiative. We're going to proactive outreach with Albuquerque Fire Rescue, Family and Community Services to these communities that are affected by violence. We're going to establish relationships related to these crimes in those areas, as well as learn and hear from them what some of the problems and concerns are. A lot of these, possibly by getting early proactive information, we'll be able to prevent the next tragic incident in those areas. And again, the mayor also mentioned partnering with health agencies and universities to study gun violence as a public health crisis. So, Sarita?
Thanks, Chief. As Chief mentioned, Mayor Keller often speaks of fighting crime from all sides. And in order to do this, we needed to break down the silos that often exist in government. One of our ways of doing this is through an interdisciplinary meeting we call the Public Safety Working Group. And 3 times a month, folks from police, fire, family and community services, transit, municipal development, senior affairs, and code enforcement come together to address the complex public safety issues that our city faces. It was in one of those public safety working groups that we were discussing a shooting, the arrest, and the case that followed, when Carol Pierce, our Director of Family and Community Services, who's over there in the corner, said, well, what about what happens to the community after that shooting, after everybody leaves? And that inspired the folks who were already working in that direction to continue the conversation and find a way to collaborate across departments. Violent crime generally, and shootings in particular, are part of that complex picture. We know that any violent crime has an impact on an entire community. We know that for a child in particular, an incident of gun violence is an adverse childhood experience that can affect the educational and health outcomes for the rest of that child's life. We know that some of our communities that experience the most shootings also have the highest needs in some other areas. So when we talk about our response to gun violence, we know it needs to include the context that these shootings occur in and the aftermath that they leave. The problem response teams have been around in various forms as a feature of community policing, but the way that we're doing this differently is through the leadership of police, fire, and community and family services working together. These problem response teams have become a proactive force for change in connection with gun violence. In fact, when the front page of the Journal had a story about the tragic violent death of Sarah Dubois-Gilbreau, the picture they carried was actually AFR Captain Martin Salazar, who's here today. We also he was doing outreach as part of one of the problem response teams. We also have Lieutenant John Gonzalez of APD, wave, who is working out of the Southeast Area Command. He's a crisis intervention trained officer who's got the right expertise for this team. And we also have Gilbert Ramirez here. Gilbert, say hi. He's our Deputy Director of Behavioral Health and Community and Family and Community Services, but he's also a licensed social worker, and he personally goes out on these teams and does some of that first response. So the problem response teams establish relationships outside of the reaction to particular crimes, and they get to learn from the community about ways to address potential public safety shortcomings in the area. That also connects residents in the community affected by gun violence with services. They've done everything from helping people find counseling and outreach, to working with schools that live nearby, even providing help and assistance with the burial services. This Saturday, from 1 to 4 at the site of the old Caravan East, the Southeast Area Command is hosting a community event to do more of this proactive outreach. And Southeast Area Commander Johnny Etta is here as well, if you have questions. Members of the problem response team will also be out there. It's going to be a great event, so we hope that many of you can join us. And I have to acknowledge here the leadership of APD Chief Mike Geier and AFR Chief Paul Dow and their deputy chiefs, who have spread a culture of collaboration between those two departments. One of the great things about my job is I've gotten to know a lot of other people who have the same job everywhere from Seattle to Atlanta, and I'm pretty sure that there's no place in the country where the police and the fire departments work as well together as they do here, and that's because of the leadership that you two set, so thank you. The second area I want to address is gun violence research. Over the past few years, we've heard a lot about addressing gun violence as a public health issue. What that means is that we have to look at the bigger picture of gun violence, not just a series of isolated events, but as a part of the picture of health, safety, and well-being for our entire population. A public health analysis is a key part of our gun violence initiatives because it will help us develop proactive and preventive approaches to gun violence. Groups across the country, including the American Medical Association, called on Congress for years to change the law that prohibited the Centers for Disease Control from researching gun violence as a public health issue. And last year, Congress finally heard the people speak, and the spending bill took away that prohibition. But here's the thing, we're now 20 years behind on this research, and the winds of federal policy can change at any time. That's why Mayor Keller's philosophy is always that we don't rely on help from other places. We always want to do what we can do here at home. So the plan is to partner with health agencies, universities, the state, the county, to look at gun violence as a public health issue and transform their work into policies and initiatives that really make a difference. These efforts are in the planning stages and will roll out in the new fiscal year. I will now turn it back over to Chief Geier, and the folks that I introduced earlier and I will all be available for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarita. One more thing I'm going to point out is when we do those canvases, post these incidents, if we can't get a hold of somebody for whatever reason, they don't answer their door or don't want to be seen talking to the police, we do have door hangers that we're going to leave. Sometimes people feel better just making a call in confidence and that they're not seen as the snitch of the neighborhood or whatever, how that may be perceived. And we do get information that way. This also gives them other contacts from Crime Stoppers and other resources where ways they can reach us. Our next speaker is going to talk about information sharing and smart enforcement. He's Commander Mizell Garcia, the Special Investigations Division. He's going to talk about how we partner with other criminal justice agencies, including the prosecutors, to prosecute these cases, especially where we can go federal charges. He'll talk about weekly shooting activity assessments by the area commands and bi-weekly interagency shooting reviews. He'll talk about his gang suppression unit, the NIBIN's ballistic tracking system, gun violence reduction unit where he works with the district attorney's office task force, and some of the enforcing laws, how we're going to do that to keep guns out of hand of violent offenders. So, Commander Garcia.
Thank you, Chief. Good afternoon, all. The Chief gave us quite a bit that I'm going to talk about, so what I'd like to do is break it down into 3 specific areas. First thing I'd like to talk about is the primary initiative of my division, which is the Special Investigations Division. I'd like to talk about information sharing. I'd like to talk about smart policing, and finally I'd like to give you maybe a few trends that we're seeing nationwide that are actually coming into Albuquerque. The primary initiative of every detective in my division is to identify, investigate, and apprehend the primary drivers of gun violence. Now, I'm not specifically talking about age, I'm talking about the primary drivers of gun violence. And that's what each and every one of the units that's assigned to me, that is our primary task. So there's different ways that we do that. The first way that we do that is through basically information sharing, or what we call communication. I have a pretty substantial background in crisis negotiations, and I think we kind of brought that into the division in which we're starting to talk, and I believe the CAO talked about that. We're no longer in silos. So how are we doing this information sharing? Well, we're doing it not only on the local, state, we're even doing it on the national and federal level. So let's start start first at the bottom with the local level. My units, my sergeants from my investigative units, we not only meet with other investigative units within our department weekly, we meet with the DA's office also bi-weekly. Now at these meetings, what we do is we actually discuss, evaluate, and talk about each and every shooting that's occurred within the last 2 weeks. Every shooting with an injury, we talk about it, we identify the person, and we start seeing how we're going to work on it as a team. My division is responsible for going out there, investigating it, apprehending them, and then we submit the case to the DA's office. So we do that bi-weekly. We're in constant contact with them. The new unit that was assigned to me, the Gun Violence Reduction Unit, the sergeant of that unit works hand in hand with the special agent in charge from the DA's office when it comes to those type of crimes. The second sergeant that's assigned to me is the NIBIN sergeant. To give you an indication of how busy we've been, 2018 we had 172 NIBIN hits. We're talking about where the casings are recovered. Those 172 NIBIN hits resulted in 447 shooting events. Now what I'm saying is those NIBIN leads were connected to 447 other shootings. This year I'm at 51 NIBIN hits, and they're related to 119 shooting events. So each and every time an officer in the field picks up those casings, assists us in helping to investigate and identify the offender. With that being said, we also have what's called the gun suppression unit. These are field officers that are assigned to each and every one of the area commands that serve in the capacity of a collateral duty. So these are officers that believe in the same things we do and are going to help us. They're going to pick up those cases, those casings. They're going to pick up those cases that they can follow up on. We, in essence, provide them the training. We're going to have 42 of our officers going to the gang conference training that's going to be held at the end of this month and the beginning of next month. We reach out in my office. I have ATF agents that are embedded in my division. So we work hand in hand with the ATF on the federal level. We also work with the FBI, HSI. Every federal agency, I have task force officers that are assigned to them. We actually work on a national level with the MCCA, which is the Major Cities Chiefs Association, who serve as technical advisors to us. And what they do is they provide us with information that's worked in other cities and see if we can incorporate that into what we're doing here in Albuquerque. We work with state police, any agency locally. Today we had a meeting. We were working with our probation and parole officers from both the juvenile section and the adult section. So what we're doing now is we're making sure that this information that we're receiving is getting out to everybody so that we can work from the beginning to the end when we're prosecuting these cases. When it comes to smart policing, just like the chief and the mayor stated previously, we're at the state of the art. I have access, our division has access to technological resources that I've never seen available to the Albuquerque Police Department. We're talking about shot spotter technology that we have out there. We're talking about access to cameras that we have at the real-time crime center. We're talking about a data-driven type of assistance that the detectives that I have and every officer within the department has access to. We're responding to hotspots. We're interacting with the PRT teams, with the impact teams. So when it comes to smart policing, we're just sharing all the information. All the resources that are available to my division are available to the rest of the department. The data-driven portion of these investigations is what's assisting us. It's sending us into the areas that we need to have. Another example of data information sharing is e-trace forms. Within the NIBIN system, what we are doing now is we are following up so we find out where a gun that was used in a crime, where it was first purchased. Now, what we're trying to look at is we're trying to follow, if it's a short time period, that assists us with our investigations to find out who had that gun. But then on the opposite side, I'll give you a quick example of a case that we worked, our gang unit worked. We had a juvenile who was involved in what we believe he had 14 NIBIN hits, was involved in 9 to 10 carjackings. We were able to arrest him as a result of that investigation. He pled to 4, and we submitted 3 other cases up to the federal agency. It was adopted federally. This young man is serving 14 years in federal prison with the potential to serve 30. So that information sharing and that working with these other agencies is really assisting us as we go forward. We're working on straw purchases, and once again, we're doing that with our federal partners. We are finding out who are the people that are purchasing guns for either persons that have a criminal background or juveniles. So there's a lot of examples of what we're doing to get out there to work with our other partners to identify, once again, the drivers of this violence. The biggest thing that we're trying to do in the Special Investigations Division is, once again, just share that, eliminate those silos. Even within the department, I've been on close to 25 years. I've seen now how flat our organization is when we're sharing information. And as a division, I have resources and access to the federal agencies that can not only assist my division, but assist everyone else. One last thing before I stop talking, we'll talk about a trend that's hit Albuquerque that, believe it or not, we've been on the cusp of this. In talking to the probation officers this morning, the national trend is that our juvenile offenders, as we all know, are getting a little younger. But the good news is that the offenders who are less violent are more amenable to diversion. So what we're seeing is the same juveniles committing the violent crimes, and these are the ones that we are targeting, identifying, and apprehending. With that being said, if there are any other questions at the conclusion, I'll be available, and I thank you for your time.
Well, I appreciate everyone who's here today and for the information that was shared and the hard work of everyone that has been highlighted here in their respective departments to put this plan together. We do have a summary. It's behind me and it's right here, just if folks are interested on sort of how this plays out. And I think what this graphic demonstrates is that, as Rita mentioned, there is no one answer, right? There is no silver bullet when it comes to this issue. And so we've got to address this from all sides. It's not just data. It's not just boots on the ground. It's not just technology. It's all of that coming together, which I think actually speaks in general to leadership. Leadership at the city, that this is the direction we have to go. This is the issue we have to take head on. Now, as the largest department in roughly 1,000 square miles, this does put a tremendous burden on us because we get essentially the gun violence from all around us. But it also is our responsibility to deal with, and that's what we're really sharing with you today. Now, I want to thank also the legislators who helped fund a lot of the technology that you heard about. I also want to thank our city councilors for funding a lot of the positions that were described to you today, and all our partners, city, county, and state, that are working with us on this initiative. And so we hope that down the road, we know we have seen crime turn in a positive direction in almost every category for the first time in almost a decade. But there's a big exception to that, right? And it's gun violence, violent-related crime. That's where we have the most work to do right now, and that's what this plan is just the beginning of.